awesome reading. Brilliant meeting you after a long time. I would definitely say thanks for inviting me on this afternoon. So quickly, I think in terms of the journey as such, if I could summarize, right? So ever since my graduation, I worked in TCS for close to 2 years, and then I joined MDI Gurgaon. At MDI Gurgaon, I was really fortunate to have a wonderful faculty. I mean, that's where exactly the seeds of entrepreneurship and startups as an ecosystem, that was where I had the thought from my professors. And thanks to my wife, South Indian as well, we have a wonderful relationship. It's been close to 2 decades now. So she also has similar thoughts. So that's when the B school itself, we thought of having pursuing this startup journey. Just after the campus, I joined a startup, Global Scholar in Chennai. Post that, between 2010 and 14, I was running my own startup for 4 years. That was 48craft.com. After that, I joined one more startup, iConcept, in Hyderabad in a sales role. Post that, I was heading the business at Country Oven, and then eventually I joined Uber as a city head for one of the lines of business. Post Uber, after working for 2.5 years as a city head, I joined Udan in a city head role for the first year. The second year was primarily about regional head role for the South region for the last mile operations. Third year was more of a program management role for a central function. And then eventually I joined Adamo in a leadership role for operations. I was heading the ops for close to 25 odd cities. And then recently, 5 months back, I joined Sid's Farm as the head of procurement and supply chain. I think that's the journey in a snippet, but predominantly it's more around the startups, which is what excites me as an individual. Since B school, right, at least the thought process was, at least I know my personality in depth, and for sure for me, the excitement of working in a startup is what kind of keeps me ticking. So ever since the B school, it was always around startups in one way or the other. Either the role was different or the scale was different, but predominantly they were all startups. 48craft, I was the guy driving that closely. I was the co-founder there and running it at scale. We pivoted twice, and it was a beautiful journey. Post that, I joined tech startup, iConcept, trying to build tools for the agri sector. And I was part of the sales team, and it was a beautiful journey, right? Working closely with the founders and senior leader at the sales org, right? It was brilliant, right? In terms of building solutions for the agri sector specifically. Then I joined Country Oven. One of the fundamental idea was how do we scale up the e-commerce vertical at Country Oven, and how do we build a bunch of categories and make it big, raise funds. That was the thought process. And next, I joined Uber at a very early stage of launch in India. We're talking about the timelines of 2016, 17, right? So then Uber was just 2.5 years old in Hyderabad, at least. Like, it definitely excited me a lot. And while I was at Uber, I could see the scale really building up from a few thousand rides to a lakh rides per day. Right? And then I joined Udan. I was really fortunate to be one of the early employees. And in fact, I was one of the first guy to launch the city of Hyderabad in the operations front. So hence, I could see the scale move from, say, less than 10 tons per day to close around 800 tons per day in less than 7 months in terms of expanding the city, scaling up the city. So that was beautiful. And the second year was about kind of making sure that the last mile practices that we had in terms of driving efficiency for the South region, which was also predominantly growing massive operations at Udan, the food and grocery business. Third year was more around program manager role, but eventually we're building efficiencies at large scale. And then Adamo happened. Adamo is super exciting for me personally because we worked together while I was at Uber in terms of taxi tops for car. And then I joined the leadership team for operations when they were scaling from less than close to 5 odd cities to 20 plus cities by the time I moved out of Adamo. So I think it was always around driving growth, impact, and scale, which really excites me. So today, while we are talking, I work with Sid's Farm, and today we are on the verge of massive expansion across the country. So let me take you back to the timestamp of probably we're talking about 2007 to 9, right? That was when I was at B school. My wife, Salina, she was then in Ahmedabad, and I was at MDI Gurgaon, same time. And we were super clear that definitely one of us should get into the entrepreneurial side, and the other one will take up a regular job, right, in the interest of family. We weren't married then. We had plans of making it happen. And then after campus, at least the thought was for me to get into a startup, understand how things work, and make myself ready for that journey. So while I was working at Global Scholar, I used to constantly brainstorm with her in terms of different models, different probably business ideas that we could come up with. She is from a very strong finance background, right? And I come from very unconventional thought process of making it happen or dreaming big. That's the thing that excites me. So she used to chop down a bunch of ideas at a very premature stage. And while I was very engaged at my job, I mean, like simultaneously I was reading, observing, talking to a bunch of people. And that's when, in one of my trips to meet her, at the Chennai airport, I saw a beautiful bronze statue, the Nataraja statue. I still can feel of it as well. Right. So when I saw that, I'm somewhere stuck in my mind. And then during my next few days, I kept thinking about handicrafts. I started reading about that. So I was very well prepared. I know her. I need to do my homework really well to convince the finance side of my wife. So this time around, I started doing a proper both secondary research and primary research. And that was when I discovered that, hey, here is one product, beautiful product, just that these are traditional crafts, right? But the connect between the end consumer and the designer or the manufacturer, the gap is immense and it has lost its touch. What do you mean by lost its touch? These crafts are like few hundreds of years old, right? And designed in very traditional ways by craftsmen who are in the remotest parts of the country, the villages. Whereas the consumers are on the other spectrum, right? They're in the most cosmopolitan places of the country, or there are people outside the country as well, right? So the consumer tastes have changed a lot, but the feedback or the design feedback has not been captured correctly in the designer front, and that's where there's a huge gap. Second, because of the nature of the craft as such, right? So today we got more than 550 craft forms across the country, nook and corner of the country. So the kind of seeing a big supply chain gap here and kind of making it happen was definitely a big challenge. And last, the craftsman was definitely, if you look at the profile of the craftsman, these are like the traditional village folks who don't have access to a bunch of either customer preferences or your credit lines, a bunch of things, right? So a regular story out there. So I thought, hey, here is one problem statement which has a massive market, both domestic and international. And you have a good operational problem to be solved there. And at the same time, I could see Flipkart just starting. There were one or two other companies that just started, right? We're talking about 2009 and 10, right? 9, 10 times. Right? So that was when I thought, hey, could we do something in the e-commerce front specific to handicrafts? I was very clear, only handicrafts. We will do everything in handicrafts, but not any other category. That was a thought process that we started. We have this, there is this beautiful saying around the types or the count of art forms and craft forms, right? The Chaturshashtikalalu is what we call them. So there's 64 of them. Of them, specific 48 number is more about the craft as such, right? Of the different art forms and right. So 48 is the craft, and hence we thought, hey, there is one number, it will stick well with the customers, and that was the thought over there. So that financial discipline was always with her, Saujanya. Right? I think that's one certainly strong learning for me, and in fact, that is what I would definitely want the young entrepreneurs out there to be super serious about that. I was, thanks to my childhood, thanks to my nurturing, right? I was always this bold, confident, super aggressive guy, right? I just think of something, I just jump into it. Very, very impulsive guy. I was never very clear about the business plan. I was never very clear about what should be the unit economics be like, what should be the marketing spend like. So I wasn't very, very clear. I just knew that, hey, there is a problem statement. I think I can crack it. I think I have the right skill set. I think that was the only thing that I had in my mind. I know that with good effort and resilience, I think I could.
So how did you convince Saujanya?
I think I had some basic numbers. On the top of it, I had some basic numbers in terms of the overall market of the Indian urban consumers, the e-commerce transactions happening there, the kind of adoption rate of Flipkart in India picking up really well. I read some early literature of Amazon picking up in US probably a decade and a half back, right? So with the internet users coming up and a bunch of things happening on the internet side, I felt very clearly with that instinct that, hey, this is bound to happen. You just have to be there and make it happen. I think I just did one very, very imagination that I was running her to convince her to get into that because it was important for her to be kind of part of the journey because between the two of us, the kind of understanding that we had was One of us will take up a job, which she did then, and I will run this venture was the thought process. I think to be probably very honest and candid in this conversation, I think what is really super important is having a very clear view in terms of financials at home. Yet to be married, probably you still have a 4 or 5 years runway. That's a different scenario. But if you're just married, I think it is important to have that kind of a runway view. What do we mean by that? Hey, this journey will take probably say 20 lakhs or 30 lakhs, right? You have a specific plan in mind. You want to spend so much. You have a specific timestamp in terms of hey, this is when you will raise funding, right? So I think one, having a very clear buffer resources or your backup resources, which is super critical both for you personally and for your family as well. Two, having a very clear timestamp in terms of the runway, right? So is it 3 years, 4 years, and having a hard stop. And the third one is about make sure you have decent saving before you could start. I think in hindsight, when I look back, right, probably we're talking about 2010 June when I started then. We got married in June 2nd, 2010, on our formation day. I still don't have to apply for leave at least as long as I'm in Hyderabad. So we were very clear. I quit previous organization around May, and then we thought immediately after marriage we will definitely start this venture. So from a fund standpoint, probably we had less than a few lakhs, right? Probably some eight odd lakhs is what we had then. But I think in retrospect, I definitely feel that's not the right way of looking at a business model. You got to be like a lot more meticulous, a lot more clear about how much you want to spend, when do you raise, when do you, your exit plans as well. I think someone has to be super clear about the exit as well, right? If things happen well, okay, 4 or 5 years. If things are not moving the right 3 years or 4 years, hard stuff, whatever it is, I think being super meticulous, I think that's a crux, at least I would want to share with next generation entrepreneurs, because at times we don't give it the kind of importance that it requires. I think it is definitely super critical. Okay, let me put it this way. I absolutely had nothing. She was banking on me. I think that's the other way around to put it very, very clear. She was very convinced about the model. She was very clear. My wife, I think she was the angel investor then. I think she was super clear about that. She could raise money. She could put in some money. I convinced a bunch of my friends. That was more of debt, but I still raised money through my friends. And I got two elder brothers. Both of them are in US, and I was able to raise funds for them as well. I think that was how I was able to raise the initial capital. Inventory, yes, initially we had at least at any point of time we had a solid 2 to 2.5 lakh of working capital inventory lying at the office warehouse. I think probably this was one area where I did a decent job. I would definitely call that. While I was working with Global Scholar between 2009 and 10 and a half, right? So I had one of my friend who was Harish. He was doing the entire groundwork in terms of research, in terms of travel, in terms of incorporation of the company, in terms of working with the tech guy to make the website happen, right? A bunch of things, right? So I was on and off available. I was working with him over late evenings, or I used to travel down to Hyderabad to kind of meet him, check the progress and other things. So at least there, I was able to do some homework even before we could start up. But it took roughly 2 to 3 months since we decided for the actual website to go up and running. I think we had some initial set of friends, right? So we shared details with a bunch of friends. So obviously, they shared internally then, thanks to Facebook. Then we're talking about the days of 2010. Yeah, we did receive it on the very same day. I still remember. It's a beautiful Madhubani painting. I was super excited to pack that personally. We did a bunch of experiments as well. How do we kind of prevent? This is a proper glass-mounted painting, right? All of our paintings are glass-mounted, just like the one that you see behind, right? So how do you pack that efficiently so that it doesn't get damaged during the transit? See, the beauty about the e-commerce business was you could, unlike any traditional retail business where it's a brick and mortar business, you cannot change the layout. You cannot change the merchandise overnight. You cannot make a bunch of changes happen. Whereas in the e-commerce world, the beauty is you can change your layout. You can change the products that you want to showcase on the home page. You can build separate category pages. You can build separate landing pages. You can show a different version of the website to one set of customers versus something else. And basically, you can try a bunch of ideas. And the best part is you will quickly see the results as well. Right, in terms of customers buying, in terms of customers converting at different funnels,
And I think that is super exciting. And then every time I spend time on the UI UX of the website, you definitely see results happening in the right direction. It's super exciting. You launch a campaign, a small campaign, or AdWords campaign or something, and then someone buys through that. It is super fun because you learned it, you tried it, and you did it. That's it, right? I couldn't afford a digital marketer as a team member then. So you learn a bunch of things, you try it, and if that happens, now that is success. What does success mean to money versus what does success mean to Vamsee? It's obviously very different. But back then, we're talking about 2010 and 14. You launch a new category. You have a hindsight that, hey, Madhubani art is good. It looks good. What are the names that you want to give to that? Even names, we had very funky names. I wasn't good at names, so we kind of had some random, but definitely people pick up some art and then you feel good about it, right? And you discover one more art form. You go to the village, you scout for the best arts craftsmen there, and then you make that live awesome. And then you mix 2-3 craft forms and then you come up with a new product. So basically you are there all over the place. On one hand, you're building a product, you're solving for operations, you're solving for tech, you're solving for UI UX, you're solving for customer complaints, right? So some customer calls and says that, hey, the order has not reached. I still remember FedEx last hour to hand over the product is 6 o'clock in the office, right? We had one, the closest one that we had was in Himayat Nagar. And that shipment was bound to go to UAE. It was for a function and the customer was super critical about that. She informed us 2 weeks prior to the order being shipped. We had to get it done in 2-3 villages, source the product, come back to the head office in Hyderabad. And from there, we had to ship. And since we couldn't meet the timelines, I still remember we just took the scooter. We had 3 folks. We drove the scooter to the airport and we were caught on the PV Narasimha Rao highway. And I still remember we paid some $20 to the cop and then we moved on, right? But the point is, that was a terminal pickup spot for FedEx at the airport. We are talking about Rajiv Gandhi International Airport, Hyderabad. We did hand over the product. We did get that receipt. We came back. And the best part about FedEx is I had the flight the very next hour and then it reached the destination the very next morning. And the customer was super delighted. There's a lot of such beautiful memories. So I think anything to do with customer side. Today, when I talk to my set of team members at office, we talk about core values and everything. Whenever I look at those core values, I smile back and it brings a lot of beautiful memories.
I think I would rather break it down into say 4 or 5 stages. Just a human, right, since our birth, right, till the time you become an adult, right? So I would rather bring that correlation. Right? So you have a beautiful thought in your mind, you have a beautiful idea in your mind, and it starts exciting you. And you are so obsessed about it that you keep thinking about it, you keep talking about it. Even when you're in a beautiful relationship, you talk more about that rather than anything else. So that is when you know that you're definitely in love with that idea, right? So I think that's the first thing. So it's more about the idea part, ideation, thinking, does it work out? Is there a market for that? Will it happen? I mean, am I the one cut out for it? So a bunch of things, right, like that. The second one is probably you actually getting into the depth of it, right? So you're actually trying to understand what should the website look like, where will we source the craft from, where will I send my product to, how will I find the customers, how will I find my market. That's the second phase where you're having your hands into the task and you're trying to make things happen. So that's when your discovery phase, right? Feel that, hey, a bunch of things are not as per the wishes that you had, but you know that you're trying something. The third phase is you actually start getting a bunch of customers, right? You start getting 5-10 customers per day. And so you have a bunch of conversations happening, you have hassles in your operations, your website breaks, your digital marketing, it doesn't happen. So suddenly there's a bunch of things, but you start figuring out the problems, you start working with your team, you build your teams, you start working with a bunch of, you take a couple of customer calls, you get reprimanded for the shitty services that we have done. But I think the third part is more of the awakening part, and you discover that, hey, I mean, there's a lot to be done. Then comes your actual growth part, right? So we suddenly fix the problems. There is a beautiful team now. There are a bunch of folks making it happen for you, and you suddenly see that growth part. Once the growth happens, there will be a point of time, at least that was what I saw, right? There will be a point of time where you feel that, hey, This is much different from the Excel sheet model that I've designed. My marketing cost is what I figured it out was to, in Excel we put it as 200 rupees, and it turns out that your marketing cost per customer acquisition probably is 1300, right? And then you do a beautiful formula within Excel saying that, hey, my customers come back every 4 months and buy some product, right? I have multiple categories, so everyone buys at least one category every 4 months. And your customer hardly comes back once a year. So all your model goes for a toss. I mean, you suddenly start looking at your account. You look at the balance. Vendors keep calling you. You don't have resources to pay them on time. So I think that's a point where, I mean, you start getting those self doubts, right? So is it happening? What should I be doing? Am I the right one? Am I capable enough? So there's a bunch of questions that keep hitting the mind, right? It's like the demons keep running in the head, right? And that's the next part. The next part is the most beautiful one in terms of you kind of being successful against those demons that going ahead, right? And then you find you make peace with a bunch of them. You start killing a couple of them, and then you finally find some answers. You move forward. The last stage is about once you see this entire journey of 4 or 5 phases, then you realize that, hey, I mean, it's been 4 years now. I've slogged enough. I think within the 1 to 2 years of relationship before marriage, right? So probably I would have traveled a lot more than what I did with my wife after marriage. I had my son even 2 years just after I started 48 Craft. Right? I still regret. There are times when I regret that I haven't spent enough time with him during his 0 to 3 years. So there comes a time when you feel that, hey, the kind of pain that you're undergoing through and the outcome that you're seeing, is it really worth it? So those are some questions where that keep hitting us once in a while. So I mean, if I look at that journey of 2010 and 14, right? My wife, she being the angel investor, and a bunch of other folks who expressed interest in kind of putting in funds and raising capital, but we were not well prepared in terms of the valuation and things like that. That was one. Second, it becomes tough at times when you go back home and then you have the review of the financials back home as well. So it becomes a little nasty at times, and it gets tough to handle both emotionally and in terms of relationship, in terms of your role at home, right? So she was a co-founder and she was also heading the finance then. And every review that I had with her, it was a good eye opener for me, right? All the beautiful dreams that I had about scale, my unit economics, my retention of customers, my marketing cost per customer acquisition, everything went for a toss, right? Whatever question she used to ask me, I never had an answer for that. Very, very specific answer was something that I was just living in hope, right? Hope is definitely strong and bold and confident that, hey, I will solve this problem one way or other, but that's not sufficient. I think that is the bottom line. That's not sufficient. That's not going to put food on the table, right? So that's not sufficient. And within the first 1.5 years, we figured out that e-commerce for the individual consumer in the domestic market is not a viable proposition, right? Specific to crafts, it's not a viable proposition because of the high customer acquisition cost and logistic cost, the working capital inventory, so a bunch of things, right? So it doesn't work out.
And somewhere in 2014, from the new year onwards, I met with an accident. Within a month, my wife, she broke her leg, and it was a major surgery that she went through. It was super painful for me then. Financially, I was like beaten down to pits of earth. And while I had these thoughts lingering in my head. What do we do next? How and all these things. That was when she and I had one conversation. I still remember that very clearly. So she said, "Hey, Vamsee, you put in your best. You tried whatever you want to do. I think I'll not be able to get back to my job somewhere in the near future. I think I want you to take up a job. Let's come back to this entrepreneurship at much later point of time. I mean, when things are good, right? I think by the time itself, I had enough excuses and ropeway and whatnot, right? But the road to the exit or road to making money was never very clear. I think that was the moment when I felt that, hey, it's time. That's it. It was super emotional for me, but I think that's probably I'm a much mellowed down version now, rather with that. Yeah, then it was very emotional for me. So for me, the way I look at life is either I do it or don't. These are the only two extremes, right? I never have that was when I decided, hey, I need to get back to a job. I need to shut shop. So I was very clear. That's it. Decision done and dusted. let's move on. I was going through mentally like a very tough time. It's important. I was a young guy then. Probably it was tough for me then. And I have been a super achiever in my school, in my college, in my graduation. I was a good achiever. I've been academically top. I was a good sports guy. So this failure, I wasn't able to handle. I was definitely in doldrums. I was financially shattered. I didn't have, at least, I wasn't able to show my face. I shut my friends completely down. I couldn't even talk to my wife looking straight in her face. So it was super tough for me then. Yeah, but it's okay. That's life. That's the beauty of life. Coming out of that, what we say, breakup, I think the best, one of the solutions that I had was, in fact, I didn't make it to IIT as well while I was at intermediate. A bunch of my roommates actually got into long term and they did that. That was one more small regret in my life for not opting for long term. And I wasn't able to handle the IIT episode as well. That was when, interestingly, my father gifted me 2 books, right? One was about staying okay, or the other psychology book was I Am Okay, You Are Okay. I think those 2 books made an immense shift in my thinking process in terms of how do we process failure, how do we look at habits, how do we look at at the age of 15 was when I saw that massive failure. So I know what it is like. And the best part is I have always been a good sportsman right since my childhood, right? Playing with my elder brother's friends who were like literally 7 to 8 years elder to me. So I was super clear that I could handle failure. All that I needed, I need to get into some rhythm which will engage my mind in the entire day instead of me getting into those thoughts of, hey, at 40 craft, I could have done this, that. I should just be engaged. I think that's the only solution. I just have to be engaged. So on one hand, I had my son at home, who was literally 3 to 4 then. That was one. Second, at office, I had, though I would not take names here in the interest of their career, brilliant friends. In fact, even though they were not part of my team, I made friends with left and center everybody. This is one lie, probably a wife, right? In terms of if I were late home, right? Why? Because they were hanging around. I spent enough time kind of having fun. A job, I was smart enough to figure out, right? So in terms of what is to be done, the deliverables, the timelines, I was smart enough to figure that out. It's not much of a thing. What is more important for me was to enjoy as much as possible and get out of that failure mindset. Right? That was the only thing that I was focusing on. I was not even focusing on the job as such. I was only focusing on, hey, I should be happy. I deserve to be happy. I think that was what I used to tell myself. I deserve to be happy. Thanks to a couple of my MBA classmates, right? They made me feel really good about myself. They only told me one thing. Hey, dude, I mean, out of a batch of, say, probably close to 300, right? Both the batches put together, my wife's and mine as well, right? So probably I was one guy who really had the kind of, even though I wasn't very prepared for that, I had the guts to get into it, right? I think that statement from one of my batchmate, who wasn't a very great friend, but coming from his mouth, right, that meant a lot for me that, hey, the trying part itself is awesome. 4 years trying, making a bunch of things happen. I think those small success moments made me tick around. And then I felt, hey, let me get into the zone at the new place, make some good friends, finish my work, have some fun, go back home, play with my kid. I used to watch at least 2 movies with my wife during that next 1.5 years. This introspection, I think I've done hundreds of times. So I think it's super easy for me to kind of get there quickly. So the first thing is about domain expertise, right? If you're trying to solve a problem, are you the expert in that? Do you have the relevant domain expertise? The first one. I had no clue whatsoever about digital marketing, but I had to learn and do. Think about it. If you're learning and doing, you're literally losing a timestamp of almost 2 years, right? Whereas if you have worked in digital marketing prior and then you're getting into this, probably you're better off, right? It's not about not doing it, but you're definitely better off. So that's what I'm talking about, relevant domain expertise. Neither do I know anything about handicrafts then. All that I built was learning and doing, right? Trying something, learning, and then trying some prototypes, doing, right? So that itself is a time consuming process, and that itself is a huge expense to the startup as well. Second one, at the top, it's a lone battle, right? Being a founder, single founder, it's a lone battle, right? You cannot have a battle in operations, sales, marketing, tech, finance, everything, right? So it is super critical to have at least 2 to 3 co-founders. Right? There could be outlets here and there who will be successful in being sole founders, but I think it is super critical to have 2-3 people at the top to support you, to back you, and kind of making it happen day in and day out, right? Because right at the end of the day, being an entrepreneur is a literally a 24/7 kind of a work regime that you're setting up against, right? So it is important that you got to be at the right energy, because it shows within the entire team, right? If you have the right energy, it becomes contagious and the entire team does a great job. I still remember I had this beautiful conversation with folks from Purple, right? One of the, both the founders, I still remember having a detailed conversation with them about unit economics, logistics at 48 Craft, because they just started 2-3 years later than 48 Craft. One of the guy comes from a solid financial background, I think Manish, right? So Rahul comes from a solid ops background. I think that's a good combo, right? So from a personality standpoint, you got to have complementing people who do take ownership for the respective functions, right? When you have that, I think you are super clear about the outcomes, you're super clear about the risks that are involved, you're super clear about the plan, so that you know when to, at least you know when to do what. So a bunch of things. The third one is about your financial planning, right? How deeply have you thought?
So that financial discipline was always with her, Saujanya, right? I think that's one strong, certainly strong learning for me, and in fact, that is what I would definitely want the young entrepreneurs out there to be super serious about that. I was, thanks to my childhood.
Brilliant question. I would rather put it this way: even before you apply for an interview, right? So you got to be super clear about where do you want to work, because your journey has to be respected in that workplace. The conventional or the traditional businesses may or may not understand what an entrepreneur actually went through. He or she will not be able to appreciate the skill set of an entrepreneur. For sure, the mindset or the kind of skill set that a manager in a regular environment will definitely, or he's not in a position to evaluate a good entrepreneur, for sure, even though it's a failed entrepreneurship journey. It is important to understand, hey, in this particular environment or in this particular kind of context, my profile would be respected. For instance, example, right? If I were to look at Uber as an example, Uber by nature itself would only look at resumes of startup journeys back then. I'm talking about 2016, 17. So that is the place where even if it were a failed journey, I could still be open about having a decent conversation around that. I think that's the kind of places that we're talking about. Uber, Google, right? People like such cultures which actually embrace more of startups and entrepreneurial scenes. I think those are the places that we should apply for. First one. The second one is about, how do I add value in this particular context or in this particular environmental setting versus my own stint. I think out there it's super critical about doing a lot of homework around what are the problem statements at the organization, what do they want to do, more in specific details about the role as such, and giving relevant examples as to what you have done in your own respect to startup to make such things happen. Third, if someone feels you're overqualified, I think there's nothing that you can do to justify that. So you just need to step out of the room. I think it's more to do with finding a right match between what I want to do or what you want to do versus what they offer. Because unless until you have that sweet spot, unless until you have that mapping really well done, and if you don't have the conviction, I don't think it will work out in the long run as well. So it's going to be super painful for both of you, right? Both for the employer and for us as well as a entrepreneur, kind of molding and getting into a regular employee. I would still kind of put it in a very different narrative this time around, right? So in the previous question around the books and the movies, I was talking about childhood, right? So at times it is super critical for us to know as deep as possible, because what drives you, what makes you happen, what makes you think about a bunch of things, it's super critical. So if I look at myself, right, as a kid, I was awesome in sports, right? Cricket, basketball, I was a school captain. There were a bunch of things. As a basketball captain, there were 2-3 excellent team members who were like super good at shooting and scoring for the team, right? My goal or my role as a captain was for us to win as a team. I was good at rebounding. I was good at the close shots. I wasn't a very technically sound basketball player. I was just tall. I was athletic. I was good. But the simple point here is, what is your role in making this successful? The understanding of that, once you internalize that, once you have that clarity in your head saying that, hey, what is the bigger picture here? How does the org become successful, or how does this particular function become successful? Once you have that clarity, and when you kind of correlate that to different snippets of your own journey, I think you can gel well. That is the first one. Right? The second one is, for me, at 48 Craft, obviously, right? I take the calls, right? Every call, I quickly, at my disposable, tuck, whatever I feel like. Today we want to launch our marketing campaign in US, let's do it. Today we want to try a new product, let's do it. So it was me who was taking the calls. But I did work in a bunch of organizations where probably, okay, not to take names, for to buy a Dettol bottle in a particular XYZ place, probably it has to go through 4 layers of approval. So the simple point there is, you are playing a game, the rules are different. So you got to be a good team player in the interest of the org, in the interest of the function, and in the interest of your career as well. You got to play the game differently. You got to be smart enough to understand the rules of the game, right? Obviously, when you're playing basketball, the rules are different. When you're playing cricket, the rules are different. You got to be smart enough to understand your role as such and be very flexible, be adaptable, make yourself be a good team player, be very clear about that. I would go a step back and look at my childhood as well, because probably these books, movies, other events in life, definitely they have a big influence, but I would definitely bring childhood here, right? Because there are a bunch of things, because of nature and nurture, you learn a lot. For instance, I'm from the city of Vizag, very small town, and I got 2 elder brothers. And they gave me a tough time when I was a kid. So bullying with them, kind of fighting with them, making things happen with the limited resources that I have, you obviously keep thinking about how can you make it happen. That was the first thing. The second one is, at any point of time, there will be plans that will go for a toss because of multiple external dependencies, right? For instance, as friends, we used to play a lot in the park. So if it rains, what do? Right? You plan to go to a movie. Your parents say no. So what do? So for me, because of a bunch of constraints, because of a bunch of things not in the right favor, obviously there's a lot of planning around it, making things happen with the limited means that we have. I think that helped me become very bold, confident, and handling things that, hey, come what may, I can make it happen. That is one. Second, when you know your gaps, probably you know what is to be fixed, and how to fix that, probably your books and other things can definitely help us. Right? With that, probably if I were to come to books, for me, probably the first non-fiction book that I read was just after my IIT debacle. The 2 books that you named just now, I think those were gifted by my dad, and I think that helped me come out of my extreme low period in my life, one of the toughest period in my life way back then. I never had any such feeling till then, because I was always excelling in my academics. I was a super solid guy in sports. So I had the wonderful achievement record. So I was in the right zone. So books, to come back, the first thing is probably in general, books like Monk Who Sold His Ferrari was one that influenced me a lot. Dale Carnegie's books in terms of, hey, how to win friends and influence people, The Leader in You. I think they definitely made an indelible impression in me. And then there was this book by G.E. Chairman. I think I read that while I was preparing for CAT. That was super awesome. And though this is a little controversial, I did love Hitler's autobiography. I did love Hitler's autobiography. Bunch of books. For me, what is more important is implementing the practices of suggested or recommended within the books. So what I do is I have summaries of each of these books now, and I go through them once in a week or once in a fortnight and see if I'm actually practicing them, imbibing them, how I internalize them. Right, that is one. Second, what I noticed after a point of time, after looking at a bunch of non-fiction books, is more around, hey, the same concept. For instance, if I look at the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, to be very blunt and honest, I think the same were being told as part of your sayings within the literature script, probably some 100 years back, right? So I think it's about implementation of the things that you already know versus trying to rediscover something else. I mean, being prescribed by someone out there in the US who's become a famous author or something. Second, in terms of movies, thanks to a couple of my B school friends, I'm a big sports movie buff. for sure. Anything to do with real life stories around sports, for sure. I used to watch in college. There are a bunch of sports biopics and real life stories that I have watched, and it definitely really mesmerizing. Probably for grit and resilience, it is always going to be Cinderella Man, Seabiscuit, right? For something like a coach or being a good leader, I think Coach Carter is something that I would definitely get even now. It's a lot of such good moves have made a good indelible. Specific to business, probably I loved Founder, I loved Steve Jobs' biography, right? And then I really did love Oppenheimer. So these are the ones which stand for excellence, your passion for doing something, you want to build something big. I think these are the ones that are like, probably one thing that kind of made me sleepless was A Beautiful Mind. I still remember I was in Kolkata then. I was in the best time of my life. I was in graduation then. I still remember I was in second year then. I saw this movie and I went crazy, right? And then till then, the moment you start engineering college and then you give up ACADS, right? So I think after this, I picked up ACADS. I started coding. I did some wonderful coding as well. And then we come back to our usual method. That's a different story. But yeah, I mean, there are some beautiful movies that did leave an indelible impression. So what is really important is the kind of conversations that we have or the kind of thoughts that we are surrounded with will define what we are. For that to happen, you got to have the right kind of people around you. Now, what do you mean by right kind of people? People either who challenge you, people who come with different thoughts, people who kind of question the norms. I think this is one, right? So for me, I'm super fortunate to have the best devil's advocate in my wife. every morning, every evening, whenever I have a new thought, a new idea, whatever, if I'm having some problem at office, if I want to solve it, I run through her. And I promised her that I will pay her in kind, right? So, and I did ask her for the birthday gift. Every year she asks me, hey, what do you want for this birthday gift? I'll tell her, I need 10 man days. I need 20 man days. So every hour that I spend with her probably is to that and make sure that so when someone is super smart and when someone you have such conversations, it helps you understand how you are thinking, right? What are the flaws in your thought process? So that's the first thing. The second one is the moment I wake up, right? From the time till the time I hit the office, right? It is very rigorous planning. I just stroll around the house, whatever task that I do, but the back of my mind is a bunch of things that are to be done for the day, things that can go wrong, what are the risk elements, big levers for that particular day or big levers for that particular month, the to-do list, right? Things like that keep running in my head and I keep pushing my team for that. Right? The third one is once we come back from office, right? On the way back home, right? This is where I spend time with myself and I start introspecting. Could I have had this conversation better? Could I have had structured this conversation better to make it more convincing, make it more persuading for my team? Could I have had done a better job with my manager saying they're setting the expectations clear? Or the other way around is, I had this corporate journey for 20 years now. So I look at all my fuck-ups and then I think, hey, sorry, how could I have done better? And with the journey that I had now, right? How do I look at that incident differently now? How could I have avoided the debacle now? How will I do differently in my current role? I think internalizing the learnings, making sure that you're setting up yourself for success this time. I think these are 2-3 habits that are like super. The first one is definitely do it now, because in the kind of world that we are in, I think speed is super critical for any startup or an entrepreneur. I think that is something that is super critical for me as an individual and for my team as well. Do it now. That is one. Second, it's in terms of speed, in terms of making it happen, even in the smallest form, making it happen. And third one is about look at my conversations with my colleagues and team members. I think it's about let's not wait for the perfect solution. Do something and then let's innovate. Let's keep getting better. Let's make it happen. Let's make it great and discover and make it happen. I think these are some things that definitely make it big is for sure, because either you do it, make it big, or let's not even think about it. We got one lifetime, right? And for sure, either you have a mediocre life or you give your best shot and become a hero, right? So I think being remembered for what you do and the kind of impression that you want to leave people with, I think that's the best that I can go after. So if I'm anyways working, so the best way is in that 8 to 10 hours, if I'm anyways working, the best way to do is do an awesome job, give your heart and soul, and then make it big. Entrepreneurship by itself, and the nature of itself, is filled with risk, right? In every possible form of risk that you see out there, right? Unlike a job where you have a very well defined scope, very well defined goals, and you got resources at your disposal, things like that. Whereas out here, super risky. So the fear of failure, it's one thing that kind of hits you real hard, and handling that becomes tough at times. I still remember, probably used to switch off my phone and go to bed, at least to have that solid nap. So that was time when you get cringed upon in terms of too many things running in your head, and you're not able to just handle it. So I think this is one area where either you're not comfortable talking about it with a bunch of folks around, your regular friends will not be able to understand your pain as such, because they go through regular jobs, and a job is obviously different from an entrepreneur role. So whom do I share this with, right? Finding that person is super critical, because he or she should understand being a entrepreneur. That is where a good mentor, someone who's been an entrepreneur, actually helps. I think that's super critical, because if you are in a good mental health, obviously you'll be able to be a lot more successful. I think that's the first one. The second one is you having a solid support system at home, right? Let it be your spouse, your family, right? If you have a good support system, then probably you'll be able to spend more time on the problem statement at hand and can do justice to that, rather than if your time is spread across your 4 or 5 different things, it's tougher for you to handle that. The third one is your physical health, right? Your mental health in a way obviously influences or impacts your physical health. So it is super critical to have a good exercise or a regime to make sure you are in the best of your health and kind of get that momentum going day in and day out. I think that's more on the entrepreneurial side. The second part of that, right, in terms of once you're done with the journey, once you've had if it's a good exit, obviously nothing like that, but if you had a bad patch, you get into a job, right? This is the first thing in a job, right? Probably a lot can be talked about this, but in brief, right? There's a few things that definitely helped me. The first one was about building a good circle there with whom you can have some good conversations and have some good fun, so that you come out of that pain very quickly. Second, it's about what does success mean at the job. If you have those candid conversations with the manager, he or she will be able to tell you, hey, this is what is expected in this time and whatever it is. Since you have gone through a journey, probably with the resources at your hand, with the kind of folks, friends at office, I think you can make that happen. The third one is about having that good long-term view, right? Once you have that long-term view, you will not be so upset or bothered about that one blip in the journey, right? When you look at life at a stretch of say 50, 60 working years, right? If that is the case, probably you'll consider this as just one pit stop. And when you have that view, probably every day from then, you'll probably take it up a lot more differently, and you keep learning a lot. Then you prepare yourself for the next venture or next idea that is coming up around the corner. Either you got to be smart enough to do the savings, have some decent savings, and then get into the journey is one way of it, or your spouse should support you, things like that, your family. The other way around is you got to raise funds pretty early, so that you don't get into that tough situation where you're bound to pledge your own financial savings, and you come broke. Being broke is, I think, super painful. So it kills you both mentally, and your self-esteem goes for a toss. I think if you can be very meticulous about that, it's going to be super helpful in your overall journey. Yeah, the first one is probably, right, today when I see a bunch of folks around simply floating super awesome sexy titles saying that founder, startup specialist, this, that, whatnot, I think it is critical to understand the specific problem statement that we're trying to solve, number one. Number two, do I have the relevant skill set in the first place, or do I have the relevant domain expertise in the first place to solve it? Number three, have I done my homework really well? What do you mean by homework? It's about one, do I have solid financials at home? Two, do I have all my roles sorted out? If I were son of my ailing father, I think that is super more important rather than getting into startup now, right? If I have a troubled relationship, sorting that out, kind of spending time there, fixing that and moving forward is like a lot more important than a startup, because ideas, I think there are the plethora of that out there, right? a startup or an entrepreneur definitely needs a kind of execution discipline, and that comes over time. And I think it is important to work in a bunch of startups much before you actually could become your entrepreneur by yourself. Work in set of startups, relevant domain, relevant space, whatever that you want to do, gain a lot of exposure, probably 5 6 years, 10 years, and then probably then that is the time when you can get into it. I think that is super important. Personally, when I signed up for this particular conversation, I wasn't even very clear about what, how, things like that. But definitely this last 1.5 2 hours, right? I think it took me back to 2010. There were conversations where we talked about childhood. So it took me about a bunch of beautiful memories into defining what I am as an individual. And I think I'll go back home like super happy and super excited. Probably somewhere at the back of my mind, as humans, we do have regrets. I think I'll go back home with super excitement.